2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It's the most common substance on the face of the earth, but it has a lot to do with whether or not you're going to get your bear this year. Do you know that the most common question I get from bear hunters is, how do I get these bears to come to my bait during the daylight? In many cases, that's actually related to water. And that's what we're going to talk about today. If you've ever had the experience of finding a bear bedding area, then you know that it's almost always associated with water. Some of the best bedding areas that I've ever seen that are just completely littered with bear tracks and beds and tunnels are dark, secluded areas with a lot of heavy overhead cover, so they have a lot of shade. They're mossy, they got ferns usually, and often they're on the edge of water or in a swampy area. I can remember the first time I ever found a bear bedding area. It was over 20 years ago, and I was trailing a wounded bear, and I came across this area, and it was just dark and damp and, I mean, creepy. It was almost spooky to a point because it had such a cool, different feel to it. I mean, definitely felt a drop in temperature when I walked into this cool, dark area. And I could actually see bear beds. They're about 3 feet across or a little more. And it was in the moss and it was spongy. And when I walked over and stood in one of those beds, water began to seep up around my boots. Water is such a huge integral part of everyday life of black bears. After the breeding season ends, about the middle of July or so, black bears are completely focused on getting enough calories to build fat for the winter. This period of time is called hyperphagia, and what they're doing is they're just sleeping and just eating with a definite emphasis on the eating. And they can take in 20 to 25,000 calories a day, and in fact, when resources are abundant, they can take in as much as 40,000 calories a day, and they're putting on a lot of fat. Well, they need a lot of water to help digest all these calories and help convert them into fat. So they're drinking huge amounts of water every day. You want to talk about how much weight bears can gain? I'm going to tell you a little story. This is about a bear that was collared in the Riding Mountains of Manitoba quite a few years ago, and they caught this bear on June 25, and it was a big adult male. They weighed it at that time, and it weighed 430 pounds. Well, they caught it again on September 7th, and they weighed it again, and it weighed 803 pounds, so it had gained 373 pounds over the course of the summer. Now, 100 pounds is very common. 200 pounds is not uncommon for an adult male bear to gain over the course of the summer, but this one gained an average of about 5 pounds per day. Now, if every day was Thanksgiving Day, I could probably do that too, but it just goes to show you how incredibly efficient these bears are at taking in calories and converting them to fat. And also keep in mind that across the United States and also parts of Canada, if you have a fall bear season, you're baiting in August and you're hunting in September generally, and it's a hot time of the year. And bears have a heavy layer of thick fat, and they have thick black fur that is really hot on bright sunny days, and they're going to look for a spot where they can get cooled off. Those spots are almost always associated with water. So when we're out there baiting, we want to make sure we provide high quality foods for them to compete with what they have naturally, but we also want to make sure that they have the availability of water. And here's where we get into the idea that the proximity of water has a lot to do with whether or not the bears are going to come to your bait during the daylight, because those bears are spending their days in and around water. So if your bait is not close to water, it's just going to take them too long to get to your bait. I mean, the sun starts to get low in the sky and they get up and they think, okay, I'm going to go get something to eat, and they start towards your bait. If it's too far away, they're just not going to get there before it's full dark. So if you have quite a few bears that are showing up at your bait right after dark, there's a very good possibility those bears are using water that's just a little too far away from your bait. Keep in mind that the area between your bait and the water has to have good heavy cover that a bear will feel comfortable traveling through in the daylight. They just don't like to walk across open areas and expose themselves when they're approaching a bait. They stalk the bait. They use a lot of caution when they're coming into the bait. So is there an ideal distance between your bait and water? And I would say, if I had to pick numbers, I would say it's probably between 100 yards and 200 yards. And the reason for that is if it's too close, then when you come to bait and you're banging buckets or maybe talking or whatever, there's too good of a chance that you might spook the bear if he's too close. So you want him to be far enough away that he can kind of be aware by scent and smell and hearing of what's going on at the bait site, but not be spooked when you go into bait. So I think kind of roughly a minimum of about 100 yards is probably about right, and 200 yards is probably the upper end of what I would like to be. So I'm looking for bait sites that are within 100 to 200 yards from water, and also they have a good corridor of thick cover that the bears can approach the bait between the bait site and that water. If you start to see bears showing up at your bait site with wet fur, then you know that you're on location. So water isn't the only thing that contributes to a really good quality bait site, but it's one of maybe the most important thing. So keep that in mind when you're choosing where you're going to shoot your next bear. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.